Hi, I'm Caleb Welch, and I love trains, from steam engines to locomotives. I love them all. My interest in trains started when I was about 5 years old. I bet you can guess, as a 5 year old, what my favorite train was. Yes, you guessed it, Thomas the Tank Engine. I saw Thomas in Strasburg, Pennsylvania back in the early 2000s, and even took a ride. It was wonderful. I started collecting trains. I have mostly HO scale. Later on, I started to build replicas of steam engines. I am a rail fan. A rail fan is someone who likes trains and likes to track them. There are groups of people in certain areas that track the movement of the trains and which track they're going to be on, what time they're passing through a certain area, so that the rail fans can go see these trains and take pictures of them. Now, you might think that all trains like Norfolk and Western, Canadian Pacific, BNSF, and CSX travel the same track and the same route. But apparently, that's not the case. Each train company has its own route and own tracks they travel. Although, some train companies do share the same tracks and travel the same routes. For example, CSX G124 BNSF Grain and CSX K676 Canadian National Ethanol share the CSX line. Some great places to see these trains in museums are the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and Strasburg, Pennsylvania Railroad and Museum. I was in Strasburg, Pennsylvania this summer and rode the 611 steam engine. I made a replica of the 611 steam engine. I posted it on the Facebook page of Friends of 611, and a board member of the Virginia Museum of Transportation saw my replica. He then contacted me and invited me to Strasburg, where I met the crew and talked with them. I got to blow the whistle and I rode the train. It was a great experience. If you ever get the chance, please take that opportunity to go to Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and go through the museum up there and buy a ticket to ride the train. There are many different kinds of trains. Trains transport many items that we use every day. Here are a few things that trains transport: grain, coal, cars, ethanol, and of course, people. And now for your viewing pleasure, I have created a slideshow of some steam engines, locomotives, and passenger trains. I have tried to include the name of the engine and where this was located at the time of the photograph. In one of the slides, you will be able to look up underneath the steam engine, which is located at Strasburg, Pennsylvania Railroad Station Museum. I have also included one of my replicas of the Norfolk and Western 611 steam engine. So climb aboard and enjoy the journey. Here's Thomas the Tank Engine. This sparked my interest in trains when I was 5 years old. This is one of the steam locomotives that is in display in the Baltimore and Ohio Train Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. The Cass Railroad Shay steam locomotive. This is another one of the locomotives they have in Baltimore. The Mark F7A passenger locomotive. Sometimes they have it on display at the museum. Sometimes they run the locomotive for excursion train rides around the museum grounds. This is another one of the locomotives they have in Baltimore. The Baltimore and Ohio GP30 locomotive. They also run this locomotive for excursion train rides around the museum grounds. This is the Amtrak's Capital Limited arriving at the Amtrak station in Martinsburg, West Virginia, with 145 Heritage Unit leading. This is one of the pieces of railroad equipment they have on display at the museum in Baltimore. The Baltimore and Ohio train crane. My great-grandfather, Floyd Waters, was a rackmaster on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. When there was a train derailment, he would gather his rail crew, go to the derailment, and clean it up so the rail traffic could resume. This is a Norfolk Southern XFURX Deleaser SD40-2 sitting in Shenandoah Junction, West Virginia, with the track repair crew. They had the track repair crew to repair the track, and since a couple of gondolas have derailed because the track gauge was too wide, which caused the gondolas to fall in between the gauge. This is a Norfolk Southern SD70 Ace, number 1206, with Norfolk and Western J-Class 484 steam locomotive number 611 in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. They were transporting the 611 from North Carolina Transportation Museum in Spencer, North Carolina, to the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania for her second visit. This is the Amtrak's Capital Limited passenger train passing by a CSX empty coal train in Cumberland, Maryland. This is my paper replica of the 611 I was telling you about. This is my fourth 611 that I built and posted on the Friends of 611 group on Facebook. This is a Norfolk and Western 611 blowing some steam while getting ready to pull her first excursion train ride in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. This is the elaborate woodwork inside the Marion passenger car number 88 of the N&W 611. This is the nose of the N&W 611 steam engine. This is one of the steam locomotives that are on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg. The Pennsylvania Railroad Class E6 442 steam locomotive number 460, which was built by the Altoona Works in 1914. This is a view that some would never see. I was very fortunate to be able to look up underneath Pennsylvania Railroad Toledo steam locomotive number 1187, which was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad in its Altoona shops in 1888. It was an amazing sight to look up underneath and see all the parts inside. This is another locomotive on display at the museum. A Conrail EMD GP30 number 2233, built by General Motors in April 1963, and has seen service as Pennsylvania Railroad 2233, Penn Central Railroad, and now serviced as Conrail. This is another locomotive on display at the museum. The Pennsylvania Railroad E44 number 4465, which was built by General Electric for the Pennsylvania Railroad between 1960 and 1963. The Pennsylvania Railroad used them for freight service on the Northeast Corridor. They continued in service under Penn Central and Conrail until Conrail abandoned its electric operations in the early 1980s. In addition to the other locomotive I mentioned before, you can also see this locomotive on display at the Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg. The Pennsylvania Railroad E7A number 5901, which was built by General Motors from February 1945 to April 1949. Here's another locomotive on display at the Museum of Pennsylvania at Strasburg. The Pennsylvania Railroad Class E2442 steam locomotive number 7002, which was built by the Altoona Works in 1902. 7002 and 1223 were part of the celebrating the 85th anniversary of the Broadway Limited in 1987. These two locomotives have brought a lot of history to the Strasburg Railroad. In addition to the previous locomotive I have mentioned, you could also see this locomotive on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg. The Virginia and Truckee Railroad Tahoe 260 steam locomotive number 20, known as the Mogul, which was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1875. This is an N&W J-Class 484 steam locomotive number 611, which was built by the N&W's Roanoke shops between 1941 and 1950. She was retired in 1959 and was once restored in 1981 and was restored once again in 2015. While she is on Strasburg Railroad property, she is all in her glory for railroad enthusiasts. This is a CSX GEVO ES44AH locomotive number 3194, painted in its law enforcement paint scheme, which was leaving CSX Q016 double-stack intermodal from Chicago, Illinois, heading for Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. This shot was located at the Ashton Road crossing in Clear Spring, Maryland. Here is CSX E780, an empty coal train in Duffield, West Virginia, with CSX 911 painted in its first responders paint scheme, heading for Grafton, West Virginia. And here I am, aboard the 611. What a day it was. I was excited that I finally got to blow that whistle. That is a day I will never forget. And next time the 611 comes to Strasburg, Pennsylvania, I hope I will be able to go back and see her again, because she is my favorite. I hope you have enjoyed the information I had to share with you today regarding trains and train stations and spots where you can look at trains. And maybe someday we will meet on the rails. Until then, all aboard!